Alright, so in the last lab, in lab 4D, we showed how to fit a logistic regression model using the survey data. So in this particular lab, I'm just going to use the saved datasets from the last two labs to explain how to check the model performance of logistic regression when we feed the data using a complex survey data, right? Alright, so we have used some of the datasets. The simple model is basically the model without any covariates. The fit 5 is basically the model with only 3 covariates, and fit 9 is basically the covariates that were selected by the AIC, and we have included some interaction terms that made biological sense to us. Alright, so in terms of model performance, we can check the area under the curve of the ROC, or it is known as the AUC or C statistic. We know that 92% to 100% of this AIC is the excellent discrimination, 0.8 to 0.9 is good discrimination, 0.7 to 0.8 fair, 0.6 to 0.7 poor, and 0.5 to 6 is probably not a good discrimination model. So unfortunately there is no particular function that is inside any particular package as far as I know. There are some functions that works for non-weighted data, but for weighted data there are some functions that are available, but that needs modification to use for the purposes we are using our analysis or AUC. So we are basically what we are doing is that we are extracting the weights that we got from the design, and that is basically the corrected weights. Remember, in the previous labs we have discussed about this, and we incorporate in our complete case data, because now these weights, these corrected weights, would be the better correct weights that should be considered in the modeling. And we specify what was the fit, what was the event or the outcome, and what was the corrected weights, and that gives us 0.6 for the fit 0 or the basic model that didn't have any covariates, 0.817, that means good discrimination, right? 0.8 to 90, it is a good discrimination with only 3 covariates. When we included all of the covariates selected by AIC and interactions, that it increased a bit, but it is still in the vicinity of the good discrimination. Alright, so but unfortunately this function we are using that does not take into account of strata or cluster, so this is still going to be an approximation. So the other function that is useful to assess the performance of logistic regression is the Hostma-Lemieux test for the general logistic regression, but for the survey weighted regression we use the Archer-Lemieux test, and there is a function that is available online. I made some modification here. Interestingly, the Archer-Lemieux test, when you do not have any variable adjusted, that gives no problem. That means that no evidence of poor fit. But as soon as you start adding variables, it shows some problem. So this particular function that we are using, it only takes into account of weight, but it does not take into account of strata or cluster. So there is one additional function that I gave here that gives you the strata and cluster, and that should work for some other survey data such as enhance, when you are trying to get the Archer-Lemieux test from that enhanced dataset.